Good afternoon. My name is Danny Pierce, and I will be your narrator and storyteller for the next 28 minutes or so. Now, the story I'm going to tell you is about my dad, Thomas Guthrie Pierce. He was an early pioneer in Colorado, and he became especially important in the southwest area of Colorado, from Silverton, Durango, Mancos, and even into Aztec, New Mexico, where he had a large ranch. But more of that later. Again, thank you for watching today. So I have titled our presentation today, He Lived the Wild West We Read About, The Life and Times of Thomas Guthrie Pierce. Now, since I'm telling the story, I get to start it any place I want. And I need to tell you a little bit about my birth so that you will understand the dynamic that went on between my family and me and my father. So this first slide is my father holding me. My father is 77 years old in this photograph, and I am 4 months old. I am the 16th and last living child of my father. This next slide is Dad's 80th birthday party, holding the slightly bewildered young man on his right, which is me, Danny, at age 3. Notice the forest of candles on the birthday cake. I remember this photograph being taken. I had a wonderful childhood. Being the baby of the family, I received a lot of love and attention, and my dad and I were great buddies. Now, lest you be driven into a false understanding of things, I could be a little stubborn at times. I was not a perfect child. But here I am. This is a very happy photograph. I got my first Harley Davidson there. But unfortunately, my dad passed away just a few months after this picture was taken. I'm 5 years old, summer of 1952. Now, these are my older brothers and sisters. I was fortunate to be able to grow up with my father's first family. They told me stories about my dad. My older siblings were effusive in their praise. It was obvious that they deeply loved and respected their father. They were all hardworking, honorable people. It is through their eyes that I learn about my dad, the gentle, loving, white-haired old man that was my father. These are their voices and their stories. I am Danny Pierce, the last surviving child of Thomas Guthrie Pierce. There is no one left to tell his story, so we begin. General Ulysses S. Grant, Civil War hero, begins his first term as President of the United States. My father, Thomas Guthrie Pierce, is born in Sheraton, Iowa the same year, October 1, 1869. Now, my dad did not have a happy home life. By all accounts, his father, my grandfather, Charles Pierce, was a very mean, abusive, rotten man, and I'm told that those were his good points. Anyway, Dad ran away from home around age 14 in 1884. He somehow manages to cross the Wild West alone with little but his wits and the clothes on his back. Now, here are some of the famous and infamous characters that were alive at that time. General George Armstrong Custer, steely-eyed commander of the 7th Cavalry, killed at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, June 15, 1876. Tom Pierce is 7 years old. Billy the Kid, notorious killer, shot and killed by one-time friend Sheriff Pat Garrett, July 14, 1881. Tom Pierce is 11 years old. Jesse James, wanted desperado, bank robber, and outlaw, is shot dead by Bob Ford on April 3, 1882. Tom Pierce is 12 years old. Last but certainly not least, Geronimo, fearless Apache warrior and war chief, on the run from 2 armies at once. The United States Army and the Mexican Army combined could not capture him and his small band of Chiricahua warriors. On the warpath in Mexico, Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, 1850 to 1886. Now, somehow Dad managed to get his way all the way from Iowa to the panhandle of Texas, where he fell in with this gentleman, Charles Goodnight, famous cattleman and Texas Ranger, gives a job to young runaway Thomas Pierce on his ranch at Palo Duro, Texas, 1885. Tom Pierce is 15 years old. Now, Charles Goodnight was to become a major historic figure in the Old West. A Texas Ranger and cattleman, he and his partner, Oliver Loving, start the first of the great cattle drives, from Texas up into Colorado, New Mexico, and Kansas, to the railheads located there. Legendary western towns like Kansas City, Dodge City, and others owe their fame and fortune to the great cattle drives started by Goodnight. Shipping Texas beef cattle back to their eastern markets became big business in the late 1800s. Now, food for the Wranglers was a necessity, so Goodnight invented the chuck wagon to meet their need for nutritious, if not always tasty, food. Now, Thomas wants to make more money than he can earn as a ranch hand. He reluctantly says goodbye to his friend and mentor, Charles Goodnight, and finds a better paying job in Colorado. Tom Pierce is 17 years old, 1887. Now, Marshall Pass Railroad at 10,852 feet high is the very first railroad to cross the Continental Divide. Maintaining the tracks and keeping the tiny narrow gauge engines running is a monumental task, requiring strong young men, but the wages are good. This is an actual picture of the Marshall Pass train. This locomotive was involved later on in a terrible wreck, and both the engineer and fireman were killed. They did finally restore the engine, and it is setting under a shed in Alamosa on the Rio Grande River. And if you ever go through there, you can see this engine. Now, maintaining a 4% grade over the high and rugged Colorado mountains is not an easy task. And a 4% grade merely means you go up 4 feet for every 100 feet you traverse laterally. Now, this required a lot of surveying and engineering to accomplish this difficult feat. Now, this next slide might be a little difficult, but I will try to make you understand it here. This top part of this is a cross-section of the pass, Marshall Pass. This is the top of the pass at 10,582 feet. So this squiggly line down here is the actual path that the train had to take to get up the mountain. And you can see it took a very long time to get over the mountain. And this had to follow every little squiggle in the mountain, around and back and up and down and back and around. A very difficult task. Now, Thomas carefully saves all of his wages from the Marshall Pass Railroad job, and after 2 years of hard labor, he saves enough to send back east for his entire family. His mother and 4 brothers arrive by rail to the tiny mountain town of Crested Butte, Colorado. Dad's older sister Dora and her husband Ed Clark are already living and working there. Charles, their abusive father, is left behind, alone, in Iowa. The year is 1889. Here's a picture of the Pierce brothers reunited in Crested Butte, Colorado. Tom Pierce is 19 years old, and my dad is the tall one here in the center. The year, again, is 1889. Now, I already told you that Dad's older sister, Dora, works in the boarding house at the Bullion King Gold Mine in Irwin, Colorado. She is the cook for the hungry miners. Here's a beautiful autumn day at the Bullion King Gold Mine, Irwin, Colorado. Special edition Denver Republican, Crested Butte, Colorado, February 26, 1891. A deadly snowslide has claimed the lives of 4 victims at the Bullion King Mine above Irwin, 9 miles from Crested Butte. The worst snowslide ever heard of in the county came down from Ruby Peak, about 1 o'clock yesterday, sweeping over the Bullion King mine, carrying death and destruction in its wake. The slide started from Ruby Peak, a mile and a half away, and gathered snow as it traveled. It struck with such force that the structures were crushed like eggshells and scattered hundreds of feet down the mountains. The big boarding house, all gone, not a whole chair to be found. Fortunately, the miners were all in the shaft house, having just finished dinner. Had the slide been 10 minutes sooner, there would not have been one left to tell the tale. The victims of the slide are Mrs. Ropel, the superintendent's wife, Mrs. Clark, the wife of Ed A. Clark, who kept the boarding house, and her 2-year-old daughter, Grace, also Captain B.F. Smiley. These are the unfortunate victims buried in the snow. Mrs. Clark's mother and brothers, Mrs. Pierce and sons, all reside in Crested Butte and are grief-stricken. Poor Ed Clark was down yesterday and was seen around town buying little knickknacks for his wife and baby. He started for Irwin about 12 o'clock, little dreaming that those for whom he was struggling were passed away into eternity by a cruel snowslide. Denver Republican, Saturday morning, February 28, 1891, Crested Butte, Colorado. P.F. Ropel leaves here today with the remains of his wife, who was killed in the Bullion King snowslide, and will arrive in Denver tomorrow morning. Mrs. Ed Clark and her baby have both been removed from the snow and will be taken to Denver for burial tomorrow. Captain Smiley has not yet been found. Denver Republican, Sunday morning, March 1, 1891. Ed Clark started to Denver today with the remains of his wife and child, victims of the Bullion King snowslide. Both were put in one coffin, and it made an effective scene to see the little child in the arms of its mothers. Mr. Clark goes to Arvada with them, where his relatives reside. Now, Dora is also pregnant with her second child at the time of the slide. The Pierce family loses 3 lives in this tragedy. Broken and sick at heart over their loss, they leave Crested Butte as soon as the snow melts and move to the newest boomtown, Durango, Colorado, spring 1891. Durango, Colorado in 1888. It looked much the same when Tom Pierce arrived in 1891. Tom Pierce wanted to be his own boss, so along with his brothers, they start the first of 2 very profitable restaurants in downtown Durango, the Pierce Brothers Cafe and the Hope Cafe, summer 1891. Now I titled it the first of 2, but I'm not sure which one this was, but this is one of the restaurants that the boys owned, and it must have been the 4th of July or some holiday, as you can see by all the festive streamers hanging from the roof. Now I want to draw attention to this young man right here by the coffee pot. This is Dad's older brother, Charles. Now I told you earlier that Grandpa Charles was a mean, abusive man, and it seems like Charles, his son, kind of inherited some of his personality. So even though the brothers were making quite a bit of money off their restaurants, there was strife and discord in the family. Not only was his personality disagreeable, but it turns out that he was a socialist of all things. The brothers were trying to make money, and he was trying to give it away. So eventually the strife caused the brothers to split up. Most of the Pierce brothers stayed in Durango, and Charles moved to Texas. But Charles was not entirely bad. Charles Pierce, loner, socialist, and hero, drowns in the Pecos River, Imperial, Texas, June 9, 1918, while trying to save his son Leslie from the floodwaters. Both father and son perish in the attempt. Now back in Durango, the restaurants are a huge success, and the brothers soon hire a pretty, blue-eyed Southern girl to help them, George Ann Bell Mathis and Thomas Pierce are both smitten by the love bug. They are soon married, summer 1894. Now, Thomas is earning good money, so he diversifies his business interests and buys a large ranch in New Mexico. He invests the profits from his 2 successful Durango restaurants into raising sheep. This is the log house at the New Mexico Sheep Ranch. Thomas and Belle lived here, and Belle gave birth to her first 4 children in the territory of New Mexico, 1898. My dad, Thomas Guthrie Pierce, as he looked at the turn of the century, a handsome young man going places. Dad is 30 years old in this picture, 1899. The Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, December 17, 1903. Tom Pierce is a successful rancher, has 5 children, and is 34 years old. A few years later, Henry Ford's first Model T rolls off the assembly line. October 1, 1908. Tom Pierce has 7 children, 2 restaurants, and a very lucrative sheep-raising business. 3,000 head of sheep. Where are we going to put them? Now, Thomas loads his sheep on the D&R-GW narrow gauge railroad that passes by his New Mexico ranch and sends them up to Silverton, Colorado. He then disperses them into smaller herds of 500 to 600 head each. His summer camps were located on Engineer Mountain, Lime Creek, the flats around Silverton, and Howardsville, and up on 12,492-foot high Stony Pass. Prosperity has come at last to Tom Pierce and his first family. Now, this is somewhere up in the high mountains at the summer sheep camp. The man standing in front of the tent is my older brother, Pat Pierce. It is believed that the Mexican herder was named Appion. Delivering supplies to the high mountain meadows to his sheep camp, Pat Pierce shows off with his new Winchester .30-30 rifle. As you can see, the only way to get supplies in was by pack train. Written on the back of this photograph: top of Stony Pass, sheep camp for the summer. Our tents are on top of these mountains. How do you like them? July 1st. And I can tell you, I have camped at 12,000 feet, and it is bitterly cold even without all the snow. It's had to be very difficult camping indeed. Now, Thomas's idea of locating his ranch in New Mexico turns out to be a very fortuitous choice. He is able to load his sheep onto the narrow gauge railroad rather than herd them long distances to pasture. This choice also avoids any bloody conflicts with the cattle ranchers, whose blind hatred of the sheepmen leads to the indiscriminate slaughter of many sheep herds and numerous deaths among the herders. For a more in-depth account of the sheep wars, I refer you to Dr. Andrew Gilliford's excellent book, The Woolly West. Pancho Villa, Mexican revolutionary and bandito, stages a bloody raid on the American arsenal at Columbus, New Mexico, March 9, 1916. Tom Pierce is 47 years old, living in Durango, has 9 children, and is still raising sheep on his New Mexico ranch. George Ann Bell Mathis Pierce dies unexpectedly after minor surgery to remove a cyst, April 5, 1917. During the 24 years of their marriage, Thomas and Belle have given birth to 13 children. Belle's death leaves Thomas alone with 9 children at home. 4 other children died in infancy. After the death of his wife Belle, Thomas throws himself into work. He expands his business interests to include 2 working coal mines, plus a brickyard, manufacturing bricks for the rapidly growing boomtown of Durango. He also invests in precious metal mines in the surrounding area. All of a sudden, Thomas Guthrie Pierce, wealthy widower, has suddenly become the most eligible bachelor in Durango. The marital status of Tom Pierce is not lost on the single ladies of Durango, and during the next 13 years, he becomes the recipient of numerous invitations to Sunday afternoon luncheons and invited to attend afternoon tea and other social functions where single, eligible ladies just happen to be present. He wisely declines most invitations. This is my favorite sister, Laura, and her husband, Everett Bixler. Laura is one of the unseen people in this presentation. She's usually behind the camera. She took most of the photographs that you are seeing today. Everett was Dad's foreman and a very invaluable man. He helped run the brickyard and the coal mines. He's a very talented fellow. I've titled this slide, Evening at the Pierce Brothers Sunshine Coal Mine, looking west towards Hesperus, Colorado. This was the first mine that Dad put in, and if you're going to Cortez from Durango, you will cross right by in front of this mine and go around here. There's nothing left of the mine now, but the road goes right through there. The second slide is Peerless Coal Mine, tipple number 2. It's a little hard to see, but it's here in the background. There was another tipple here before, and this is the second tipple. Now, for years, the Pierce mining camp was the end of the road, picture taken around 1921. And again, if you're going to Cortez from Durango, Highway 160 comes right through here now, goes up here and makes a very large bend and goes on up to Durango West. Underground in the Peerless Coal Mine. Coal mining is dangerous, hard work. The burrow was named Jenny. The high-grade bituminous coal produced in Tom Pierce's 2 mines warmed many Durango homes, powered the railroad's narrow-gauge engines, and was used as coking coal for the gold smelter located on the Animas River. Now, I told you that my dad also had a brickyard. And here's a picture of some bricks coming right out of the kiln. Now, I had to fudge a little bit and turn this on its side. I couldn't get it in the right way. This is the top of the pile. But you can see these are coming out of the kiln. And Dad could fire a lot of different kinds of bricks at one firing. These kind of have a red color and a texture. And these are whiter in color. And he could fire a lot of different kinds of bricks. These are almost white here. How do you make bricks? Well, I'm very glad you asked me that question because I have an answer. Here's members of the Pierce family visiting Dad's brickyard. Now, the building over here on the right, this big wooden structure, is where the raw clay was screened and pressed into brick molds. 2 large red firing kilns are behind the car. Dad used his coal to fire the bricks, a very synergistic operation. Here's a picture of my dad delivering a load of bricks. It's a little hard to see, but if you squint, you can tell that that old truck is pretty well loaded down, and he's heading in to Durango with a load of bricks. Now, Tom Pierce's bricks form the structure of many important homes and businesses in Durango and the surrounding areas. Here are just 3 examples. Smiley Junior High School, Durango, Colorado. Pierce Company bricks hold this historic building together, and that is a lot of bricks. The iconic and magnificent Strater Hotel in downtown Durango, Colorado. Pierce Company bricks were used in the new addition on the back. 4th of July celebration on Main Street in Durango, and the J.C. Penney building is gaily decorated for the occasion. Pierce Company bricks built these historic buildings. There are many others, of course, but these are three that know about my mom told me. Now, the good times can't last forever. In the 1930s bring the Great Depression and the horrific Dust Bowl. The rich and wealthy always find ways to survive, but the poor suffered greatly during the next 10-year period. Shanty towns sprang up like mushrooms after a rain, as the poor huddled together in drafty wooden shacks, trying to stay warm and stave off starvation. This must have been hell. Look at that picture of total devastation. Now, Durango had two shanty towns in the early days. Mexican Flats and Webtown were where the poor people lived, in drafty wood and tar paper shacks. Comprised of people of mostly Mexican descent, but along with a smattering of other ethnic backgrounds, these forgotten people were the most affected by the Depression. There were no jobs available for them, and no one had any money. Tom Pierce had compassion for them and acted. This is what shanty towns look like. Now, this particular one is in Chicago, but I selected this one because it looks almost exactly like the place that we called Mexican Flats, which is now down where the sewer plant is located on the Animas River in Durango. This could be an exact replica of Mexican Flats. Now, you might think this doesn't look too bad. At least they have a place to stay and a place to live, and that's true. But when you get closer, this is what poverty looks like. This is the Depression. This was the reality for many Americans. These are the people my father chose to help. During the Depression years, Pierce Company coal trucks made uncounted no-charge deliveries to the people in these shanty towns. Tom Pierce knew that his coal was key to keeping these destitute people warm and alive. He did not regard the color of their skin or their lack of social status. Tom Pierce gave what he could. He gave quietly and without fanfare, and with no expectation that he would ever be repaid. Now, Tom Pierce gives up the life of a bachelor and selects the charming widow, Lila Stonebarger Powell, to be his wife. Tom Pierce is 66 years old. Lila is 33 years old. Summer 1935. This is my beautiful mother, Lila Matilda. You may ask why Dad would choose Lila Matilda to be his wife when he certainly had his choice of many other women in Durango. Well, there's a number of reasons for that, and number one is they had known each other for a long time. Mom's first husband, Pete Powell, had worked for Dad in his coal mines. Pete unfortunately got kidney disease and passed away. And so they had known each other for a long time. Number two, look at her. She's an absolute babe. Mom was beautiful and had a figure to match. Number three, she could cook. That woman could make an apple pie. Fourth reason, she was a very spiritual person. Mom not only went to church on the weekends, she went to church in the middle of the week to prayer meeting. That is a seriously good woman. Last reason, Mom had what would be called today eidetic or photographic memory. She never forgot anything. She could remember people, places, things, dates, anniversaries, birthdays, weddings, long strings of numbers. She never forgot anything. And as a little aside to that, growing up with a mom who never forgets anything can be very frustrating for a young boy. Now here's a picture of my mom and dad, newlyweds. They had just been married a few months. They're taking a stroll on top of Reservoir Hill. This is where the college is located now, Fort Lewis. The smoke in the background is from the gold and silver smelter located on the Animas River below. June 1935. Now, over the next 9 years, Tom and Lila Pierce will add 3 more sons into the Pierce family line. Their last son is Danny, Tom Pierce's 16th child. World War II starts with the surprise bombing of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, December 7, 1941. Tom Pierce is remarried, has 15 children, and is living comfortably as a businessman, Victorian gentleman, and respected as one of the early pioneers of Durango. Tom Pierce is 72 years old. Now, this is a picture of Mom and Dad up checking on his Red Mountain gold mine. This is 1943. Now, during the war years, things that were not deemed critical to the war effort could not get supplies, and gold and silver mining was not deemed critical to the war effort, so they could not get powder or rail or anything needed to run the mine. But it was still necessary to check on the mine because the buildings were full of machinery and the tunnels had to be checked for cave-ins and water in and that sort of stuff. So it became necessary to keep an eye on the mines even though they were inactive. The world enters the atomic age with the bombing of Hiroshima, Japan, August 6, 1945. Tom Pierce is still working and 76 years old. This is the last picture of my dad that you will see. This is Dad, wealthy gentleman, building homes with his own bricks. He works because he enjoys it, not because he needs the money. Helping him is his youngest daughter, Laura. Tom Pierce is 78 years old and has fathered 16 children, 1947. Now, my dad lives for 5 more years, succumbing to his final illness at age 83. His funeral, which I vividly remember, was one of the largest events held in Durango to that time. Hood Mortuary was crammed to overflowing with flowers, mourners, and well-wishers. Along with the many lawyers, bankers, and other dignitaries present, were an equal number of the poor people from the shanty towns. They had come to pay their last respects to the man who had helped them in their time of need, a fitting tribute to a generous and extraordinary man. Tom Pierce's life spanned 83 exciting, dangerous, and many times tragic years. From the Civil War, horse and buggy days, steam power, 3 major wars, the introduction of the electric light and the telephone, the automobile and powered flight, and into the atomic age, a dizzying voyage through time. And throughout all the changes in his circumstances, Thomas remained a principled, generous, and kind man who truly cared for the welfare of others, and I want to honor his memory. And so to that end, I have restored an 1860 gentleman's carriage. And this is the front of that carriage. This is Dad's logo, Peerless Coal and Brick, Thomas Pierce, Durango, Colorado. On the back of the carriage, I've named the carriage Lila Bell in honor of my dad's 2 wives. Lila was my mom, and Belle was his first wife. And you can see the 2 roses intertwined there on the axle. This is a picture of Dad's carriage, and I'm hoping to place this in a museum so that people can see the carriage and appreciate it for what it is and perhaps learn a little bit about my dad, a remarkable man. Now finally, a lot of what I learned about my dad came from strangers. I was so young when he passed away. But growing up in Durango, I encountered a lot of old-timers who had known my dad. And as soon as they found out I was Tom Pierce's boy, they would relate a story about some escapade or some kindness that Dad had shown them. And this was unfailingly true for everyone I met. It made me feel so proud to be his son.